Again, thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Jay McCann. I work at the Westminster Schools in Atlanta, Georgia, and I have the pleasure of being joined by my good friends Tia Hill at Davidson Day School and Lindsay Waters at Christ Church Episcopal School. We will be discussing the unique ways that we do junior programming from multiple perspectives. And this means that we may not get time to speak about the overbearing mothers or how to awkwardly tell a student that a teacher really doesn't want to write their letter for them. But if you find those questions to the Q&A box, though, we'll be happy to get to them. And with that note, this is a webinar, so we ask that you ping us with questions at the Q&A. We'll have time at the end of the presentation to take more of those then. So as we look at the idea of junior programming, there are different goals that we are seeking to achieve. So helping students to have a balanced list, managing expectations, and even developmentally appropriate activities that make the most of each season. So these are kind of how we'll split up our time this morning. So as I said, I'm coming to you from Atlanta this morning, but part of my journey goes back to Denver, Colorado. I first worked as a counselor at George Washington High School, a public school in urban Denver. I then continued on to a private suburban high school. Private suburban high school at Valor Christian High School, and I'm now at Westminster. I think it's interesting to note that since each of these schools represents a different style of education, with each style of school, they brought different challenges in college counseling and advising. And I wanted to speak about those things early, but before I jump into that, I wanted to ask a poll of each of you. So if we don't mind stopping because everyone's coming from a different school, we are going to ask that poll to see just a better idea of who is joining us today. So we're taking up almost there, about 85% we've heard from. Let me give it just another second or so. Okay, well, I think we could go ahead and those that have been able to give their feedback. So what we're seeing is the greater majority is private high schools that are joining us today, but over a quarter of you are coming from public high schools. And I think that's a good thing to note. We're glad that we got a good variety, 12% independent, and then some of you fitting the other category, welcome from the college side. How big is your caseload? The most common would be between 40 and 80 students, but then also greater than 250 students. And so I think this is a really kind of interesting place to find this conversation because a lot of different needs and how we serve students might not look the same at all schools. Then the third part is, what point do you start working with students? And the most common one is freshman year. Then sophomore and fall junior year being 21, 22%. So I think it's interesting to kind of note some of these differences about how we go into it. And I think that's why I wanted to slow down and talk to you about how I've been at some different schools, because I think it's important to know that not everything that fits at one school will fit at every other school, right? So I wanted to point that out just because as I talk about these different schools, maybe something will work for you and maybe it won't. So as I move on, let's see here. So I wanted to describe quickly the differences between these schools. So GW is a unique school because it's almost evenly split between third black, third white, and a third Latinx. It had a full variety of socioeconomic differences represented. It hosted the city's historic IB magnet program for top achieving students, the oldest one in the state. And at the time, there were only 4 counselors for 1,400 students. So there are grave differences in how I could interact with students is between the programs as well. So we had to get creative. So I couldn't pull kids out of class out of certain programs and so on and so forth. So instead of doing a presentation that we normally do to all the juniors in an auditorium and cafeteria, and roughly no one would have a clue what was said, we created brown bag lunches. And this was allowed us to speak to 10 to 15 students from our caseload at a time over an assigned lunch period. It really helped to like streamline communication, get to know the students around their peers, and just see what questions that they had in a format that like other students would be able to ask that. So that was really helpful. And then the other thing is that I created a 3-day summer workshop, and it spoke about the topics of admissions, financial aid, college list building, starting your college essay, and even brought in someone to talk about the difference between the ACT and the SAT. It was a great way to have college admissions counselors join us as well, and some others from around the community. And I'll be speaking about what happened in the summer workshops, since some of it went along with the next school's test prep classes. So at Valor, there are a lot of different interests that are there. And so some students were seeking to play collegiate sports, some continuing in the performing arts, some seeking a Christian college education, or trying for the most selective colleges. So a wide variety, and we had limits as well in how we could interact with students. And so I utilized our standardized test prep classes, which were offered 2 days a week during a student's off period during their junior year. And this did some programming before we started our family meetings. And so in addition, in January, something we did is we had a junior night event that functioned similarly to a case study event, but a major difference from a case study is that it was a large gathering in the auditorium where admissions reps from 4 colleges would speak about how they view the fictitious students that you would read about from their respective colleges. So families came away with a pretty good understanding of how like admissions was viewed from different colleges. So, and again, we try to not have like all highly selectives where everyone got denied. So helped as a morale booster. And then at Westminster now, there's a narrower GPA range than my previous schools. And as a selective high school, I find that there are more overlapping colleges on student lists, which is why individualized counseling is so important. And in terms of programming, one of the things I was going to say is just our Dean's Night event is where we ask admissions deans from around the country to visit with us and share insight to families. And this more or less kicks off our family meetings at the beginning of second semester. So there's plenty of other things I can mention that we do at each of the respective counseling departments, but I wanted to focus specifically on a tool that I created when I was doing summer workshops at a public school and continued in the test prep classes at Valor. And so I'm going to kind of talk through the test prep classes. So when I went in, the first day was all about college experience. And so if you really think about leading much more on the college experience, it was Katie Murphy had developed a thing about no-name colleges, and I tailored it towards my students about describing colleges and not telling them the name, and then them picking which one they like the most. In addition, we would then go on to talk about what you should consider, what are important criteria that should be on your list to figuring out where you would find yourself successful. And then I'd end that class period having them stand up and getting around the classroom and asking them, what's a good, would you want to be close to home or further from home, and having them move around, or the smell of grass or the sound of urban life. I don't remember what I said, but something like that, where they were kind of moving around and got them engaged, thinking more about the college experience completely, like not about admissions. And so the second day, though, was really all about understanding admissions and where you fit into it. And so I created a self-evaluation to help them understand what a target school meant. And so this is the terms that we used, where an anchor is a school you feel a high probability of being admitted to, and a reach school being a low, and target would be right in the middle. And so this evaluation was something that we just went through, and they'd fill it out. So for instance, here's a couple of the questions that were asked that were quantitative. So we'd provide them their unweighted GPA, because kids don't know what that is. And then, or they'd guess really high for themselves. And we'd provide them any testing information that they have, like a PSAT or ACT. At my previous, the public school, they did class rank, so we did go off of that, but now it's the highest math level achieved, and then total number of AP or IB courses. And so I'm sure that you all could tailor this towards your own schools and what you see there. But that was the whole quantitative aspect of what we looked at. And then here are some of the other measures that we would use, and it allowed a good way of starting the conversation about personal statement and how important it is. How many drafts are you willing to do for it? How is it going to be read? Letters of recommendation. By the end of that time, we would actually talk about teachers you had in mind for letters of recommendation. What would be strong categories and the ways to think about it? A national or state level of academic awards that you reach. Leadership and creativity. For me, I really tried this was kind of mining for other things that they didn't think about before that could be added to a resume. Sometimes kids would be really strong at working on cars and have developed other skills that they didn't think college admissions would want to see, and just trying to make sure that they really didn't sell themselves short in all these qualities about them. And I'd end with making a joke about how much money you should give to a college for institutional advancement. And kids would be like, what? It's not fair. Well, anyway, that's college. So from there, after they filled out the whole thing, they would then go through a scoring system for it. And so I'm just going to show one slide. So like number of AP classes that you took and how you would score yourself accordingly. It gave you an idea of just, one point that was going into the whole total of it. And then as they're totaling up their full raw score, I would go over all these things that are not considered in this activity. And there's more I'm sure I could add now today. But trends in grades, and then recruited athlete, I would tell you could actually rip it up in front of me and it probably would throw it out the window because it doesn't matter. And I actually had one student do that actually. But yeah, so all the different factors that go into that would get to get them thinking more about what admissions means and what it doesn't. So then from there, I'd split every college in the country into 10 levels of selectivity. And so it gave a better understanding of what a target school would be. And so I always highlighted that this isn't meaning that necessarily that the quality of their education was better, that you would be admitted to the most prestigious law school or MBA or med school. It didn't mean any of those things. And so I just tried to give it context. But here I give them a full page based on colleges that our students applied to that were most interesting to them. But you can kind of get an idea, and even it skews towards Colorado, some of the differences of the tiers that all the colleges were placed into. So, and so it helps give a little bit of a reality check. And I would tell the kids that they didn't need to turn that into me, the activity that they did. But I did ask that they filled out this sheet for me before they left. And so I then came back to the importance of what are the things that are going to decide which college you attend, right? What are the important factors from day one that we talked through and went back to that and asked what your parents were as well. And this is really good pieces of information to have before I met with the family, right? And knowing what was going to guide their decision-making, whether it's financial aid or prestige or whatever it might be. And then listing their colleges of interest and even where they fell on that tier activity. So I would then give that to each of the college counselors, and that would really help in how we started that conversation a little bit further. So, so this was just a tool that I found what scaled well for larger groups. And it worked for us in terms of helping kids to manage expectations a little bit better. So I'm going to hand it over to Tia, who's going to speak a little bit more about the timeline.
Yes, and I'll jump into my portion in a minute. Jay, there are a couple questions for you before we move on. It's been asked if you can share the self-evaluation via email. And yes, so if whoever asked that question, if you want to share your email, we'll note it.
Yeah, I'll share some of it, but it's so contextualized from school to school that it was something I had to change a lot from my previous school to the next school. And so it works on some level, and I'll try and provide some resources towards that and how you might think about it. So, yeah.
Was also asked how many attendees you have, and I assume that meant for the self-evaluation.
Well, you could do it in a classroom. You could do it. It really was a lot of me talking and helping them frame it out. I could do it in any scale. That's the nice thing about it. So, yeah, you could probably do it in an auditorium if kids were listening. So.
Great. And then several people have asked if these slides are going to be available. And I think the answer is yes. SACAC has all of these slides, and so I do think they'll be available afterwards. But if for some reason you don't get them, feel free to email any of us, any of the three panelists, and we will absolutely share. Okay, so I am at Davidson Day School. I'm the Director of College Counseling. We're located in Davidson, North Carolina. Our upper school enrollment's about 160, which gives us a senior class of about 50 each year. I'm an office of 1.5. My colleague, Caitlin Barnt, splits her time with the admission office. So we break down our caseload in a way that gives me about 2/3, excuse me, 2/3 of the senior class and gives her about 1/3. And what I'm going to talk about is just sort of the nuts and bolts of our timeline. So we begin our work really in 9th grade, but our 9th and 10th grade programming is really big picture. So we're meeting with those students in large group settings. We're tackling big picture topics like summer enrichment planning, test prep in regards to PSAT, or just sort of long-term test planning. We also discuss things like personality assessments. But in junior year, we try to begin that work just as early as we can. And our first big opportunity in junior year historically has been our class trips. These take place in September. Jay, you can click on to the next slide. Here we go. So junior class trip usually is the last weekend of September. This is a time when our entire upper school is traveling. So there are no classes. It's typically 3 days and 2 nights. This did not happen in 2020. It will not happen in 2021. We're hoping to come up with a great alternative. But I will share kind of the system because I hope that this can happen again. So each class has their own trip with a different topic. For our juniors, it's always been a college tour. So most recently, this is what our tour looked like. We left Davidson. I think it was 5 a.m. the day we left, went to Furman and then UGA. We drove on to Jacksonville, Florida, and the next morning drove to Stetson. Then we spent the afternoon at Universal Studios, which our students loved, and spent the night again in Jacksonville and drove to Clemson the next day. This trip is a significant amount of bus time, but our students really don't complain. I think partly it's because they get to visit Harry Potter World at Universal. And for us as college counselors, for Caitlin and me, this trip gives us such a great opportunity for talking points. And so, one, we love just being with our students in a more casual setting and learning their names and learning some about their personality types. But we also love that when we are in junior meetings later, we can use these trips to initiate conversation. If we ask a student, tell me your college criteria, and they look at us, with a blank stare, then we can get more specific and we can say, tell us what you liked at Furman. Tell us how you felt when we toured the business school at Stetson. It gives us just some shared experience. It gives us quite a bit to draw from. So once again, these have been disrupted as a result of COVID, but we're hopeful that we can find some version of class trips to continue in the future. And so the next month, October, is really a time that we're focused on testing with our juniors. We administer the PSAT all 3 years, 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. And then starting about 4 years ago, we have started to administer the ACT with writing during the school day in October. So we make that test available to juniors and to seniors who still want to test. We were able to do this year, and it felt this year like we were giving an opportunity really for seniors who had not been able to test since early in junior year, or the middle of junior year. So we were pleased that we could do this again. I will say for seniors, this ACT is tough because the scores don't come back typically until late November, early December. But for juniors, this dynamic has been really wonderful because by the time we sit down with a family for a meeting later in the school year, we've got results from both tests and we can compare, we can talk about how the student felt in both the PSAT and the ACT. We can talk about a standardized testing plan so we can map out what dates we think will be the best fit for these students, and then go more in depth about test prep and what might work for each individual student. We likely will continue this. Of course, as schools have moved to test optional models, we are thrilled and we support that, but we still want to offer as many testing opportunities as we can during the school day. In November, we have our junior college night. And so we always try to have this as early in November as possible. This has typically been, an in-person event in our theater with all junior families and all college counselors. But this year, all of our programming was virtual. And one element we use that I think will carry on in the future is we sent an introductory video to all junior families before our college night. This was actually an idea that Lindsay Waters, who's going to speak next, gave me. It's something they implemented at Christ Church this year, and something she's going to talk about in a session she is leading tomorrow with her colleagues. But this introductory video was wonderful. For us, it was about 12 minutes, and it gave us really full control over the information that was shared. We used it to talk through what we thought was the most important elements of junior night. We talked through our college counseling model. We highlighted the programming our junior families could expect for the rest of the year and in senior year. We took a few minutes to talk about application review, what's happening behind the scenes with an admission committee, and we introduced our resource library. This has been really effective tool for us this year. So we have a resource library for each class. It is a shared Google Drive folder, and that Google Drive folder has a number of subfolders that are labeled so that families can easily sort through things like testing, things like curriculum, planning, course registration, seminars. Any seminar we've held with the students, we'll put our PowerPoints and we'll put our notes in this Google Drive folder. So we introduced the folder in our introductory video and sent that to families about a week ahead of time. So it served as a reminder and then also just a preview and a way to help get everybody on the same page and just give our families a little bit of, give them an opportunity to be able to go back to rewatch, but to understand what we needed them to know coming into our live event. So our live event, we brought several special guests. And in this event, we really covered things that were Davidson Day specific and also things that were like admission trends that they need to know about right now. So our special guests included yearbook representatives. They came in and they spoke about yearbook ordering. We also had our head of school speak and our dean of students. This year, of course, was unique with all sorts of new protocols and things that I think our community wanted to touch base with the juniors and the junior families while they were all together. But we also had an admission representative, and having covered so much information in our intro video really allowed us to give our admission representative the time that she needed, the time that just really allowed her to go in depth. We had Elena from Wash U in St. Louis, and she just was so great, and our families really loved hearing from her. We used the time to prompt her with some questions that were sent in from families beforehand and also questions that were being asked live. And then also as an interactive component, we included a Kahoot, which if you're not using, I would highly recommend. It works really well through Zoom. Our families were able to take a quiz that was about celebrity alma maters. So we used celebrities like Oprah, who attended Tennessee State University, and Jimmy Fallon, who went to College of St. Rose. So the point was to use celebrities whose alma maters were not necessarily the brand recognition schools and not schools with the greatest selectivity, of course, to make the point that the school where you enroll does not, the name of the school where you enroll does not dictate your career and your outcomes. And so that went really well with our community. Everybody enjoyed that moment. there was a leaderboard, and we were able to have a gift for our top 3 participants. So just a way of engaging people on Zoom, which of course we all know by now is a hard platform to engage with. And so we use junior night also to introduce our seminars. These begin in November. We have seminars extending from November until the very end of the school year. These are 30-minute meetings that occur weekly with the junior class during advisory time frame. So this is when all juniors are together. This year we've done these through Zoom, and they've worked really well. So we cover a number of topics. We have our seminar program pretty well mapped out. We begin with some assessments, some college characteristic assessments, several resources that I've pulled from Stephen Antonoff, and his got a couple of really great books and some really great resources online. Jay has worked with him and probably could talk at length about what these surveys look like and how they can benefit you. But we begin our seminars with these assessments, and then we use this time to talk about how to conduct an effective campus visit, how to make the best use of your summer. We talk about the Common application. We have students create Common App accounts. We talk about crafting activity lists and essay brainstorming. We talk about letters of recommendation. I tell families all the time that if our juniors are really focused and diligent through these seminars, they will finish junior year with all of the elements of their application started. They'll have some awareness of what each piece is and how they should approach it, and can really hit the ground running in senior year. The other piece that we have kind of extending through junior year are our meetings. We meet individually with juniors, typically end of November, beginning of December. Then we have family meetings. One note about our family meetings that I'll say now is that I loved meeting with our families on Zoom. These have always been in-person meetings, but Zoom this year really gave us a lot more flexibility with timing. Families were able to join, of course, from their places of work or from wherever they were at the moment. And so those meetings, I likely will, at least for 2021 and probably into the future, will have Zoom as a possibility, because I think it really helped those meetings to work better with family schedules. The only element I want to highlight about my family meetings are that I love list building. And so something I'll do after meeting individually with juniors and after meeting with a family is I send a follow-up email with about 4 or 5 schools I'd like the student to consider. And I make it very clear that I will continue to discuss lists with the family, but I want a little bit of feedback first. And so what it does is, of course, it allows me to make more informed suggestions as we go. I used to send a list of about 10 schools, and I just never had a lot of conversations about them or any great communication. I think it just was too many. So sending 4 or 5 has become a pretty good sweet spot for me. And I do have some really great interaction with parents and students after sending those suggestions. And lastly, the rest of our year, other programming items that happen, we will have a wrap-up meeting before the end of the year. We have opportunities for families to schedule more meetings, but this is the bulk of our programming, and these are all sort of our big ticket items that we cover. You can see on the slide, we've done a case studies. That's looked a little different through the years. This year we did one through Zoom. It went really well. And then we have a summer boot camp, and that really is more of a senior year event. It's a couple of Saturdays before school starts where students can come in and just kind of get situated with applications and logins before senior year begins. And now Lindsay is going to talk through their programming at Christ Church.
Thanks, Tia. A few questions came in while you were talking, and if it's okay with you, I'm going to go ahead and present some of my information, and then we will go through and answer any of those questions. And if for some reason we don't get to your question, or there have been a few questions about, can you share this with me? Can you share this with me. Probably what would work best is all of our emails are in the SACAC attendee email list that was sent out. Please email us and say, hey, I saw your presentation, I want this, and we were happy to send it your way. I think that would probably be easiest because I don't want to say, yeah, we'll send you this, and then we don't get to it. So I want to talk a little bit about how we encourage students to expand their horizons. How do we encourage students to think outside the box within building their list? And of course, students don't have to think outside the box. There's nothing wrong with going to a college that is familiar to the community, but we often find that by the time we start working with juniors, many times the students, and let's be honest, more often the parents, have these specific ideas of these colleges that are acceptable or that they've heard of, and those are the ones that students are going to apply to. So how do we think outside the box? First of all, even though this presentation is referring to junior year, there's a lot of work that can be done leading up to that. We offer all incoming 9th grade families the opportunity to meet with a college counselor during that summer. Now, we are 12-month employees, so at Christ Church. So, if you have the summer off, don't suggest that to your administration that you're going to meet with all 9th graders, but it works for us because we are here during the summer. And that is not a time that we build a college list for a student, but it might be a time that a student says something like, I have an older sibling that goes to this college, or I've always wanted to go here. And you can start that conversation. Well, why did you always want to go to that college? You've been to football games. What else did you like about it? Or tell me more about that. And then maybe it's a time to say, hey, you know what else has a really good program? Or what feels kind of similar to that campus? Have you ever heard of this? And just get them thinking about some other things they haven't heard of before. Sometimes we talk to 9th graders or 10th graders about the college process, and we like to use a college as an example. And instead of using a college that is in our region they've heard of, or instead of just saying XYZ University, we try to highlight a different college, maybe show an example college list that shows colleges they may not have heard of before. We do open all of our admissions representatives, all our college visits in the fall to all students, 9th through 12th grade. And we will encourage and comment on these underclassmen that visit. That was so great. Thank you so much for coming to visit. We actually had a 9th grader at this visit. That's awesome. Way to go. Way to explore that college. We have occasionally, usually about once a year, we might have someone from a college speak specifically to a 9th or 10th grade. A couple of weeks ago, we had a panel that we normally have of 4 college representatives speaking to the 10th grade, letting them know what to think about with junior year, course selection, touring colleges. Every year until this year, it has been a panel of 4 college representatives from colleges in our area, right? That's familiar, that works great. Well, this year we didn't have the opportunity to have anyone visit in person, so we ended up using a Zoom format and using colleges from across the country. And it was really cool because students had not heard of these colleges before. And so thinking about things that we'd love to keep post-COVID world, that might be one of them. We could really use that to our advantage, especially for these underclassmen groups. There is a presentation that we have given for years called Are You Smarter Than a 10th Grader? It actually used to be Are You Smarter Than an 11th Grader? But we decided that this kind of programming was more appropriate starting in 10th grade. Our alternate title for this program is Destroying Your Preconceived Notions One Fact at a Time. Basically, we want students to understand that the ideas they have about college or the type of college might be a little bit different than what the reality is. We have students at an independent school. Like I mentioned, we have a little over 400 in our upper school. Students say all the time, I don't want to go to a smaller school because I go to a smaller school, so I need to go to a big school. And we say to them, well, what about, I'll use my alma mater as an example, Furman, which is in our area in Greenville. What about Furman? Oh, it's too small. I go to a small school. Well, Furman's student body is 7 times the size of our upper school. And so letting students know, do you want to go to a school that's 7 times, that's 10 times as big? We also hear students say things like, I want to go to a large college because they're going to have a lot of Greek life. And Greek life's important to me. Well, we'll do trivia with students. Did you know that the percentage of students involved in Greek life at UGA is 25%, but at Rollins College, much smaller, is 45%. I'm not harping on big colleges here, but sometimes that tends to be where some of those preconceived notions are. So it's a presentation that we give to 10th graders with some trivia of helping them find out more. All right, let's talk a little bit more about what happens in junior year. So one of the things that we offer is a program called College Experts. I think everyone here has talked about case studies. We know, we have a general idea of what case studies is. We offer college experts every other year, alternating between a case studies program. So for college experts, we invite as many college admissions representatives as will attend. It's on a Sunday, and you certainly could do this with other schools in your area. We just do it at Christ Church, but you certainly could partner up. And we offer college expert seminars. So we offer 3 seminars. Well, we offer over 20 something seminars that college representatives present on. It's completely independent and unrelated to their institution. You want to play a sport in college, find out more about scholarships and financial aid. These college reps will give this presentation 3 times in a row, and families have the opportunity to attend 3 sessions, or they can split up and attend more depending on one parent going to one parent going to the other, and so on. Families learn some helpful information about the college process. They start to connect with a college admissions representative outside of, oh yes, that's a college that I've heard of or I want to attend. And then as you can see in that picture, it's opened up afterwards for a college fair. And they say, oh yeah, I already talked to that representative. Well, maybe I do want to learn a little bit more about this college. So it does help expand their horizons while being some really helpful college counseling programming in the meantime. I want to highlight a few things that we do with junior college programming. Like Tia said, these are some seminars. This happens also during our advisory, which is mandatory, but could happen during homeroom or during some of the time that you might have with junior students. We really encourage students to do some college research. We used to say, pick a college on your list and research it. And honestly, that wasn't that helpful because students would say, yes, I picked Clemson and I know about Clemson because I visited there and I go to the football games, and that was that. So it wasn't really fulfilling the purpose that we wanted. So we decided to start assigning these advisory groups, which are about 10 to 11 students. We assigned them colleges. They might have been colleges they've heard of. They might have been colleges they haven't heard of. And we made them get into groups, research colleges, and then create a 1-pager. If you haven't heard of a 1-pager, whoever your English teachers are at your school may have heard of 1-pagers, but basically it's a visual representation of ideas. We ask students to cover the entire page with information. They can draw, they can do a cartoon, they can do graphs, they can do a diagram, all kinds of information about that college, and then we hung those up around the school. And so neat way for students to research a college, learn how to research a college, and be forced to research a college that maybe they don't know anything about. The other thing that we'll start doing with some of this college research is helping students learn how to build a balanced list. Jay talked about this a lot in the beginning. We actually take the students that students learned about during the case studies program. They learned about these 3 fictional students and their academic profiles and what their applications would look like. We take those same colleges they were assigned to research and we pair those together. So we tell students, using these 3 students that you learned about, these 3 fictional students, and these colleges that you were assigned, would these colleges be a reach, possible, or likely college for these students? Would they be even a good fit for the students based on what you know about them and why? We found that actually getting students outside of their own process, sort of making them play college counselor and build a list and assess whether or not is a balanced list, helps them have a better idea of what they should be thinking about with their list. And it prevents us from saying, yeah, that's a reach college, or that list doesn't make sense, because they already sort of know what we're going through, and it just gives them a better perspective. The last thing that I really want to talk about are travels. So something I try to stress to families very early on, even starting in 9th grade, is, hey, if you're thinking about going to visit some colleges at any point, please let me know. And let's just imagine this is a pre-COVID world and all colleges are open for tours, right? Because we'll get there eventually. But I'll say to families, let me know. I'd love to help you plan a college tour or a college trip. Because sometimes families don't talk to you beforehand, and you have a junior come in after fall break and say, we just went on a college tour over fall break. We visited Duke, we visited Vanderbilt, and then we drove up towards New Jersey, we visited Princeton. And you're like, well, great. There's your college list. So, and maybe that makes sense for some students, but let's be honest, for a lot of students, they're going to be needed looking at some other colleges. So if students can tell me ahead of time, then if they say, hey, I think we're going to be driving up towards North Carolina, we can suggest some other colleges they might want to look at. Something I try to be really proactive in is asking students, hey, where are you going for Easter break? Or are you traveling anywhere over the summer? Or if a student is on any sort of travel team, they're on an AAU team, hey, where do you have a basketball tournament coming up? And if they're able to say, oh yeah, I'm going here, say, hey, you know what? here are a few colleges you might want to check out if you can. Or if, students say, we love to look at this college. Hey, here are some other ones to be thinking about. This visual right here is this college atlas and planner. This is like one of my favorite books ever. Tia recommended it to us. We have it in our office. I like to check it out to families. It's literally an atlas with colleges all over it. Unfortunately, it's out of print. But if you, want to do something similar, obviously there's something called Google Maps. I think we're probably all familiar, and it's probably just as easy. But anyways, that's something I try to be really proactive about with families. Even if they have an idea of where they want to visit, say, but what about this? But what about this? And tell them, you might visit this college and you might hate it, and I am not offended at all. You might visit this college and like it, but wish it was a different location. And I can help you find a college that's similar in a different location. But just trying to get in with that family and making sure they're expanding their horizons and looking outside the box a little bit. So we have a few questions left. We have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we can answer some questions. So I think I'll go over to Tia, and we can kind of start working our way through some more of these questions.
Yes, I have been trying to answer as many publicly as I can. I think really the most popular question has just been about sharing these resources. And again, Lindsay pointed out, you've got our emails. Please feel free to email us individually. And I do believe this session will be available. We know it's been recorded, so I think people can access it. I'm not seeing any though that we might need to take time to answer live. I think all of it is just more about the resources we've shared, and all of us are happy to pass those on. So again, please send us emails if for some reason you're not able to find what you need from reviewing our slides in the future.
I just put my email address in the chat thing.
Great idea. I will do that as well. One thing I wanted to point out, and I said this to Tia and Jay last week, is that, when we talk about working with juniors, and especially list building, and sometimes it can feel sort of discouraging because you think of all these colleges, and the student says, oh, I'm just going to apply here, and that's fine, and that maybe makes sense for them. But when you have that student that says to you, or that parent that says to you, I would never heard of that college, I would have never thought of that college, and that's where I'm going, or I just graduated from that college and you were the one who put that on my list. Gosh, that is so rewarding. So kudos to everybody working with juniors. I always joke that it's always fun and games when you're working with juniors, because it's just exciting. It's not, the stress of senior year and getting all those applications in and hearing decisions and all of that. So we just wish you the best of luck in all of your continued work with students during their 11th grade year.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for joining. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much.